right, so this is Copper Sun, chapters 14 through 16 summary. So in our last section, we see that Affy and Amari got separated. And so did Besa. They all got sent to different plantations. And Amari is purchased by a man named Percival Derby. And Mr. Derby, as he was pretty much referred to the rest of the book, owns a plantation called Derbyshire Farms. And he has purchased Amari specifically for his 16-year-old son, Clay Derby. And what that means is that Amari will serve initially as a kitchen slave. She will help a woman on the plantation cook, which we'll meet her in a second. But the reason why she was purchased for Clay is because at night, Clay is going to sexually abuse her, which is just disgusting. But it happened. Again, we know that it happened. So that's why she was purchased for Clay for his 16th birthday. But she will also be serving as a slave labor form on the plantation as well. We also meet our other main character, Polly. She's a white indentured servant. She's at the slave auction and she doesn't care. When she refers to the African people, the enslaved people, she says the word Negro as part of that old term that we say we don't really say anymore because Jim Crow South made it a racial term, so we don't say it anymore. But our character, Polly, is very racist, even though she herself is an indentured servant. Now remember, indentured servants and slaves, two big things, two different. Indentures, they have a set contract of years they work, and then they go get to be free. They also did have some rights. Slaves have no rights. They are considered property, and if a woman slave has a child, that slave is born into slavery. That's that chattel generational slavery that we talked about in class so many times. All right, so Polly was brought up by her parents to not like black people with dark skin. She did not like black people at all. She thought that they were stupid. She dehumanized them because that's how she was raised to believe. When they spoke their own languages, whether they were speaking Ashanti language, Iwi language, or a different language, she referred to it as jungle talk because she didn't understand it, so she just assumed that they were stupid, which we know so way better in 2021. Just because someone speaks a different language doesn't make them any smarter or dumber than you. She felt that the slaves should be grateful for being taken in and purchased here in the colonies because that was better than living in the jungle somewhere. Of course, she is self-ignorant because she hasn't tried to get to know anybody with black skin. But no, that is so incorrect, Polly, because they're being taken into a world where they're being starved, beaten regularly, raped even. And if you look at Amari's life in Ziavi Village, she was living a great life. She had a wonderful life there with her fiance and her family. She was loved. There was love in the village. She got to do the things that she wanted to do. And she was home and she was respected as a human, as a woman, young woman, etc. Here in America, she's going through terrible things. But of course, Polly has no idea of that. And she's never tried to have an idea of it. She's self-ignorant. She doesn't care to know the knowledge, which is not that uncommon for this era, for this time and place, for a young colonial girl like herself. She also feels like she doesn't like slaves because she said that slaves take all the good jobs from white people. She said the whole reason why she has to be an indentured servant is because she can't find good work. Because she said, who would want to hire somebody and pay them when they could just purchase a slave? Which, you can maybe empathize with her point, but gee whiz, how can you blame a slave or feel resentment toward a slave when they were kidnapped and taken from their village and they had to watch their loved ones die right in front of them? Polly is selfish here and she is impossible, and all we can do is we can hope that she will learn. But she definitely needs to learn today, okay? We learn about Polly's parents. So Polly's father was arrested in England, and the reason why is because he was a drunk and he had a lot of debts. And, he was probably a gambler. He bought a lot of things on credit. So because he was a drunk, he was buying alcohol and saying, put it on my tab, I'll pay you later. And because he had all these unpaid debts, he was sent to prison, or at least that's where he should have been sent. He had some friends in the prison system in England, and they gave him the choice. They said either, sir, you can, Mr. Pritchett, Polly Pritchett is her name, so her dad's Mr. Pritchett. He said, you can go into the jail system here in England, or we can send you to the colonies, because back in those times, the American colonies, they would send criminals over here to get rid of them out of England. It was a penal colony system. And he said, you know what? I think I'll take my chances in the colonies. I don't want to go to jail. So he came over to the colonies to start a new life. He married Polly's mom, and things were good for a while. They had Polly relatively quickly. But then Polly's dad started drinking again. He cracked up all of his debts again here in the colonies. And so he was forced to sign on to be an indentured servant for a period of 7 years, because otherwise there was no way that he was ever going to be able to pay his debts. Now, Polly's mom, she was a maid, and she was a beggar. So when she didn't have a job, she would beg for money. Well, money started running low. Begging wasn't working out. She couldn't get hired as a maid. So she took on an indenture as well for 7 years. So both of her parents at this point were indentured servants on the tobacco farm of Jeremy Carton, Mr. Jeremy Carton. And Polly Pritchett describes him as a terrible, mean, old, terrible person. He did not have any sympathy or empathy for anybody. He worked her parents to the bone. He was awful, just an awful person, forced them to live in this tiny attic. She hated the treatment. So her parents ended up both dying of smallpox. But before this, they wanted to see Polly become a fine lady one day, hopefully marry into a rich family. So to do this, her mom felt that education was very important. And of course, we know in 2021 that education is important. So what her mother did was that she taught her how to read through the Bible. And that is something that Polly is very proud of, as she should be. She has knowledge that many women of the time did not have, especially poor women, or you could say teen girls. That's what she is. You know, she's 15, just like Amari. But she's got knowledge that a lot of people don't have. Even young boys couldn't read if they were poor. But women's education just wasn't a priority at the time. So the fact that she can read, that's a flex. That's a major flex. She's also purchased by Mr. Derby, Percival Derby at Derbyshire Farms. We are now to the exact date of June 2nd, 1738, when Percival Derby, or Mr. Derby, purchases her indenture. A lot of people said that was stupid, because she's got a 14-year indenture, because she had to do her own indenture plus her parents' indenture, which is just crap. I don't know why they made her inherit her parents' indenture, but that's what they did. And normally she'd be spending that time out at the tobacco farm with Jeremy Carton, but Jeremy Carton didn't want her anymore, so he sold her. He'd rather have the money than the person. And the whole reason why Mr. Derby bought her is because he thought it would be a good investment, because in his mind, where she'll be almost 30, well, she'll be like 30, when she gets out of her indentured servitude, he doesn't feel like she will even live that long, because indenture, it's really hard on people. And even though ultimately at the end of the day, they are not slaves, because they're still human people, they were treated almost as bad as slaves. They were worked almost as hard as slaves. So not very many people would live as 14 years of slavery or indentured servitude, because their work is so hard. And in this particular Derbyshire Farms, it's a rice plantation, which we will learn about a little bit later, how rice is planted. I'll tell you, 1 grain at a time with your toe. You drop it in, you squish it with your toe. That is hard work. And harvesting the rice and everything else, that is some really, really hard work. She's purchased, and the first thing that Clay Derby, the son that Amari was purchased for, he notices that she can read. And Polly actually has a little chip on her shoulder, which who wouldn't in her state? And she kind of mouths off a little bit to Clay. And Clay Derby says, oh, no. You don't mouth off to me. No. And furthermore, don't tell my dad that you can read, because women have no business being educated. And if you're like me, you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he just said that. But this is the year 1738. He is rich. He's entitled. He feels like he's allowed to talk like that. And technically he is in this society, and it's disgusting and terrible. But that's how the colonies were before we were a country, and actually a lot of years after we were a country. They come to Derbyshire Farms, and they meet Teeny and Tidbit. Teeny and Tidbit, they work in the kitchen. Teeny is the slave cook for the whole plantation, and she cooks for the Derby family as well. Now, this is kind of a huge deal, because she is trusted to cook the food that feeds the slave master. So that is the most trusted slave on the plantation, because she could literally poison him at any time. Now, Tidbit is her son. He's only 4 years old, and it hasn't said this explicitly in the book, but I will go ahead and tell you. Tidbit is a child of sexual abuse as well. So Tidbit is actually biracial. He is half black and half white. She hasn't really explicitly said that yet, but I just kind of wanted you to get an idea of the poor treatment that Teeny has been through already in her life. She's little, stature wise, but she's got a huge personality, and she knows everything that happens on the plantation because she's kind of like head woman in charge, and she just knows everything, and she has access to the Derby family. And she's actually very welcoming to Amari and Polly when they originally arrive on the plantation, because she knows that feeling of being a young female slave, not knowing what the heck is going on or what's going to happen next. And she kind of gives them advice, a little bit of advice. And if you look in your notes, I've put a couple images of what a slave woman working in a kitchen would look like. Initially, the two young ladies are going to be assisting Teenie in the kitchen. And Polly's big job is to break in Amari, which means to teach her English, teach her how to operate a plantation, and teach her how to live in the colonies. Now, Polly's absolutely disgusted by this, because she thought simply because she was white that she would be working inside the house. She would be like a maid or a seamstress or something like that, because she can do all those things. She is just completely appalled by the fact that she has to live with and work with people with dark skin, black folk. She hates it because she's so racist. And it's actually really sad that she feels that way. But again, it was her upbringing. And actually, Amari's kind of quite scared of her as well, because Amari has only ever encountered one kind white person, and that was Bill. So she sees this white girl who is kind of being a little strong with her, and she kind of just doesn't really know how to react, and she fears her, because every white person that she's ever come across has either beaten her, sexually abused her, or something terrible like that. Polly does hope, though, if she can get this task done, that she will eventually move into the big house. Now, Amari is going to be working around the clock, because she's going to be working in the kitchen in the day, and then she's going to be a sexual slave at night. And then basically, as soon as Clay gets sick of her, if Clay doesn't want to sexually abuse her anymore, she will be moved out into the rice fields, which is significantly harder physical work. And that's when people really start dying off, because there's various things out in those rice fields, like snakes, and people drown, heat stroke, all that kind of stuff. And we see actually that Amari is actually sexually abused on the first night. And then we meet Hush Puppy, of course. Hush Puppy is the dog of Tidbit. He's one of my favorite characters. And I know it seems silly to have a dog's character, but he will come in as a hero later in the book, a couple different times, so just watch out for that. And we can see Teenie too, even though we don't know Teenie all that well yet. We can see that she's kind of being a mother figure to Polly and Amari, because she's sitting them down, feeding them, listening to them. And we'll see she does emerge as that. And she's a good mom anyways. Now, talking a little bit more about Clay and Percy, or Percival Derby. So Clay's mom is dead, and she died in childbirth, giving birth to Clay, which is kind of ironic, because Clay is such a terrible young man. Of course she did. She gave birth to the devil. But anyways, so he kind of resents his stepmom, Isabel Derby, a lot. And another reason why he resents her is because she's only 18. So his own stepmom is only 3 years older than him. And I think that screws with his head a little bit. And that's part of where the resentment comes from. And if we look at the treatment of women, all right, we already talked about how Clay doesn't think that women need to be educated. But Mr. Derby, he feels the same way about education, but he says this, and I quote, "Black women are different, you know, Clay. They like it when you pick them out for special favors at night. It keeps them happy and reminds them, in a very special way, who's the master and who's the slave." It's disgusting. Clay and Mr. Derby also say that slaves like to be beaten because it reminds them that you care about them and that they get their tasks done. I mean, it's just literally, you can't even, it's almost disgusting for me to say, and it's disgusting for me to read how they feel about this, but this is how people really felt. And we see them physically abusing the wagon driver, which is Noah. And he is actually a slave on Derbyshire Farms, and he's actually the personal bodyguard of Isabel Derby. And Isabel Derby actually brought him from her home before she married Mr. Derby. And something that you have to remember about these times is that women were somewhat owned by their husbands. So when a woman would marry a man, she would come with a dowry, and a dowry is a payment. Sometimes that would be in physical money. Sometimes it would be in items, like you get so much land or a house. It could be a combination of all those things. Isabel Derby came with a fat dowry because she is rich. Her family is rich. So that's why Mr. Derby wanted to marry her. Also, because he wanted more children. He wants more children to inherit his legacy, his millions of dollars, his plantation, because all he has right now is Clay. And you don't know this yet, but Isabel is pregnant. Something else that Clay does that's quite disgusting. He insists upon changing Amari's name. He doesn't like, she says, my name's Amari, but he doesn't like that. It's too African for him. And he says, well, I own you now, Amari. I own you. So you are mine. So I'm going to name you Mina. Now, some of us might say, what's in a name? That's from Romeo and Juliet, by the way. I have different names. My friends know me as Jamie. You guys know me as Miss Puckett. But I've never had a name stolen from me. Ever. And that's just what happened here. He literally stole her name. He stole a form of her identity. She has nothing from Africa. Nothing at all. Other than what's on her physical body, which is not even that, because they took her clothes from her. She has nothing. The only thing she has is her name. That's her form of identity. And they just stole it from her. Well, Clay stole it from her and gave her a stupid name. Mina? That's stupid. But he's a jerk. And so is his father. And so is the whole system of slavery.